all these different fungi, ergot, aspergillus, and cordyceps, would be able to infect our bodies and get into the brain. So I have a bit of an issue with that. So my name is Leonor Leandro. I'm a plant pathologist and mycologist at Iowa State University, and I am going to be watching clips of the HBO show The Last of Us. I have responsibility for doing research on fungal diseases of soybean, and I teach several courses, including a mycology course for undergraduate students. I am not a big horror movie fan, so I can't say that I've really watched any of those popular horror movies that are a big hit. Well, I know it's a very popular show, and students definitely have been asking me about it. And way back several years ago, I remember my surprise when in class a student said there's a video game where there's this zombies that are infected by fungi, and I thought that was really weird, and I didn't quite get why you would want to play a game like that. But students were clearly very excited, so I never played the game, but I kept hearing about it over the years.
But you, just to be clear, you do think microorganisms pose a threat?
Oh, in the most dire terms.
Not bacteria, not viruses, so...
Fungus. Yes, that's the usual response. Fungi seem harmless enough. Many species know otherwise, because there are some fungi who seek not to kill, but to control. Let me ask you, where do we get LSD from?
Where do you get it from?
It comes from ergot, a fungus. Psilocybin, also a fungus. Viruses can make us ill, but fungi can alter our very minds. There's a fungus that infects.
And so his response is that he's not very concerned about viruses, and he's not very concerned about bacteria, even though we know those two types of pathogens really cause very serious diseases. So the interview was a bit surprised, but he says he's really as concerned about fungi because not only they can cause disease, but they can also control the hosts they infect. And that is true that there are fungi that are able to infect insects in this particular case, and they can manipulate the behavior of that organism. So fungi have a lot of weapons and ways that they can take advantage of food sources, really, whether it's an insect or if it's a human or another animal or just rotting wood in the forest. Fungi have developed really clever abilities to obtain nutrition they need and to make that environment as favorable as possible for them to thrive.
What if, for instance, the world were to get slightly warmer?
Right, so I wanted to comment also on this comment the scientist was making that, with an increase in temperature, say from climate change, that all these different fungi, ergot, aspergillus, and cordyceps, would be able to infect our bodies and get into the brain. So I have a bit of an issue with that because our bodies are very complex. We have very robust immune systems, and our brains are also a lot more complex than the brain of, say, an ant that gets infected by cordyceps. So I think that's a bit of a stretch that any of these fungi would be able to just colonize and get to our brain. Again, we have many layers of defense mechanisms, and our brain controls everything we do, right? We are walking and talking and thinking, reasoning. And so before a fungus would be able to actually take over our brain and do the things like that they show in the Last of Us series, I have full faith in scientists and the medical field that we would be able to catch this thing early on, and we have tools that we can use to control these kind of infections that are not infallible, and there's some organisms, some fungi that can overcome like fungicide treatments. Chance occurrence that it would be able to evolve, and it would take time too.
And there are no treatments for this, no preventatives, no cures. They don't exist. It's not even possible to make them. So
in this clip, the scientist is saying there's no cures for fungal infections. That's absolutely not true. We have at least 4 types of fungicides or antifungal medicine that are tried. A lot of the fungal infections, humans get infected by fungi all the time. A lot of the most common things that nearly everybody will get an infection at some point, a ringworm or athlete's foot or a yeast infection, the itchy scalp. So there's a lot of like cutaneous skin infections by fungi, and those are very readily treated by over-the-counter medications, antifungal. You'll put it on your skin, and within a question of days, that gets treated. Then there are more serious infections. Something like valley fever is caused by a fungal inhalation of fungal spores. And for that one, for the majority of cases, our own immune system takes care of those infections. In some people, they can develop more like a pneumonia type symptom that doesn't go away. And at that point, you take antifungal medication. It's a lot to do with prevention and also changing other things in the environment, right? Someone who has a high blood sugar and you have a yeast infection, it's not a bad idea to lower your blood sugar content, reduce sugar intake. If you have, athlete's foot, ventilating, using sandals and not wearing sweaty shoes and sweaty socks. So beyond the medication, there's other things that we could do to boost the immune system, to create a less favorable environment. So there absolutely are things we can do, many things that we can do to treat fungal infections.
There's a fungus that infects insects, gets inside an ant, for example, travels through its circulatory system to the ant's brain and then floods it with hallucinogens, thus bending the ant's mind to its will.
This fungus is well known to exist. There's a lot of studies on the cordyceps or Ophiocordyceps. These are fungi that exist in nature, a lot of times in kind of forest systems, and they do infect ants. They also infect other insects, but we know a lot of the system in ants. And so once they infect that ant body, they keep colonizing the ant, and the ant does start changing its behavior. There are chemicals that the fungus produces inside the ant and in the ant brain that makes it behave in an unnatural way, and that it's basically making it like a zombie, walking and going to a part of the plant where it can more easily disperse its spores.
This one's done.
Yeah. I know, I wasn't expecting it.
Think he wasn't down here last time?
No. You think he came down after he was infected?
Maybe down here is where he was infected.
Wow. Pretty gory image there. So there's some realism to that image. So fungi infect living organisms or dead organic matter to obtain food. And so once they've depleted that material, they're kind of running out of food, they want to get out of that environment and spread out to find other sources of food. And so that image of someone stuck to the wall and like lots of fungal structures growing out of it, basically we see that. One thing I found interesting about this particular image is that the creators of the show were very original and creative in the sense that they've combined structures from different fungi. They see there's some kind of little wavy brackets that are orangish in color, and actually makes me think of the sulfur mushroom, which is a fungus people eat and is supposed to be very, very delicious. So they've doesn't quite look like cordyceps. Cordyceps forms more of a stalk, smaller stalks. So there's some fungal structures there, and also there's some yellow slimy growth with little frills on the tips. That is actually makes me think of a slime mold.
Ibu mungkin pendapat berat yang saya butuhkan.
So they brought in a mycologist to look at a specimen under the microscope, and that's definitely something mycologists do all the time. Because fungi are microscopic, although they form large fruiting bodies, some of them, and you can look at them with the naked eye, like mushrooms. There's a lot of fungi that don't form such large structures, and to really get to what they are, what species they belong to, we often look at them under the microscope and look for the kind of filaments they have and the kind of spores, where the spores are produced. So the fact that they invited a mycologist or asked a mycologist to come and look at under the microscope is very realistic. That's what mycologists do. And because it was a new infection in humans, they would definitely, something like the CDC would definitely want to consult with mycologists who would help confirm what this organism is. In addition to the microscope work, these days we use a lot of DNA sequencing.
cordyceps tidak bisa bertahan pada manusia.
You know, fungi don't usually thrive in the human body because our body temperature is too high. So fungi don't usually do well at our temperature of 98 degrees or so. And that's true. That's why our bodies are protected from a lot of fungal infections and a lot of other pathogens. Our system is such that most organisms don't tolerate living in our bodies. So that's a good defense mechanism we have. So when mycologists work with fungi, they may or may not wear protective equipment, depending on what that fungus is known to do. Does it infect humans? Does it infect plants? Is it something that lives out in your backyard? Does it produce any toxins? So for the majority of things, for example, that I work with, we have to wear, you know, we have to do regular lab practices. We should wear a lab coat, but the manipulation, we use a sterile environment to make transfers of the fungus so we don't get other contaminants. If anybody has allergies, for example, to Mycelium the fungus, they may need to wear a mask just so they don't breathe in the spores. But in general, in my field, we don't have to wear protective equipment. So they're doing a biopsy, and the first thing the scientist finds is a wound on the leg of this patient, and she uses a tool to cut open that wound, and can't see very clearly, but it seems like she found some fungal structures in there. And so one thing you would see if a wound is infected by a fungus might be the actual fungus structure. So these filaments, these threads we call mycelium, or even sometimes some spores. So we're actually looking at the fungus itself in that wound. Just sort of independently of the cordyceps, there are fungi, like I mentioned before, that can infect our skin. Most of them are very benign. The ringworm, they cause irritation on the skin. They actually don't even infect our tissues. Others will infect wounds. So things like a poorly disinfected wound, if you get some fungal spores in that wound. In some cases, if you have an immunocompromised system, you may get a fungal infection in that wound. So on the clip, then the mycologist opens the mouth and pulls out these strands, which again would be indication of the fungal structures themselves. So they're the filaments, the mycelium of the fungus, and the fungus just colonized the body, and now is growing out. Eventually, it will probably want to come out of the body to produce spores to kind of spread. There may be an abundance of spores in those disaster areas because of the high humidity, and the fungus is able to proliferate in some decomposing materials. And so if those wounds get infected, after the Joplin tornado, several people got infected with a fungus, and some of them died because these infections, when they're in the body, they're hard to treat and they can progress very quickly. But again, this is a very rare situation.
Pundan gabah di barat kota.
In this clip, they talk about flour as a perfect substrate for this fungus cordyceps. Well, specifically for the cordyceps, that is not the case, because cordyceps is going to be feeding on the ants or the insects that it infects. So for that particular pathogen, it would not be the case. Do we find fungi in flowers? Could we grow them in flowers? Certainly there are fungi that really like corn or wheat. They're a source of carbon, right? So carbohydrates. And so if you were to moisten some flour, and you can think even of bread, right? We add baking yeast and with some bread flour and add a little moisture, and after half an hour you have nice bubbles because the yeast, the fungus, is actively feeding on those carbohydrates and producing CO2 in the fermentation process. So can flour be a good source of food for fungi? Absolutely.
Seorang perempuan yang tiba-tiba melakukan kekerasan menyerang 4 orang rekan kerja dan menggigit 3 orang diantaranya. Mereka kemudian mengunci perempuan itu di kamar mandi sampai kemudian polisi datang. Perempuan itu mencoba menyerang dan terpaksa harus ditembak.
So in this Last of Us show, the cordyceps fungus is transmitted to others by people biting each other. I don't know of any fungal infection that would occur in that way. Obviously a human bite and someone else is always taken seriously. I think mostly it would be concerns about bacterial infections. And if there's a wound that's significant enough, and if unlikely chance there would be a fungal spore there that is taking advantage of an immune compromised system, possibly there could be an infection, but definitely it's a very rare event, and definitely not with the cordyceps.
Dan tidak ada vaksin.
Jadi apa yang harus kami lakukan?
Bom. Mulailah pengoboman.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Well, that was a very radical scenario here. The scenario posed in the show, that in face of a new infection by this fungus on humans for the first time, that there's no medicine, the solution is to bomb, is completely unrealistic. There are several antifungal compounds that we know that would be tried first. There are surgical procedures that could be used. There's quarantines and isolations that could be done. And there are scientists all over the world that would very quickly start working extremely hard and not give up until we found a solution to control this pathogen, this fungal infection. So I have full faith in the scientific community, and we just recently went through an epidemic of COVID, and it was incredible how quickly vaccines were developed and how we are now back to mostly a normal life. So if ever there is a fungal infection that would be brand new in humans, right away resources would be allocated.
They're connected.
More than you know. The fungus also grows underground. Long fibers like wires, some of them stretching over a mile. And you step on a patch of cordyceps in one place, and you can wake a dozen infected from somewhere else. Now they know where you are, now they come.
Well, interesting clip on how these cordyceps are all interconnected and can communicate with each other within a mile. There is the concept is sort of realistic. Fungi produce mycelium, so strands of filaments that can stretch out very far. Actually, there's a fungus known as the humongous fungus, and it's in the northwest coast of the United States, and it covers miles of forest. It started in a certain point. If you've seen fairy rings, you can imagine you have a mushroom in the middle, and the next year you have a little ring of mushrooms, and as years continue, that ring gets larger and larger. Well, that's because that mycelium, those filaments that were in the center, keep expanding in a circular way around that starting point to look for food, and so that area grows, and typically they produce mushrooms at the edges of that mycelial growth to produce spores and reproduce. I realized there was a lot of work and thought put into making the story somewhat based on true fungi and ways fungi spread and obtain nutrition. So that's really interesting that that there's a show based on fungi. It's not that common to have a show and a game based on these fascinating organisms. Fungi bring a lot of benefits to human life and to the planet, and more they're being explored for food, as food sources, to decontaminate, for sources of medicine. People say fungi are going to save the planet, and I believe fungi definitely have the potential. So many untapped aspects of fungal life that we could take advantage of. And of course, there are fungi that are harmful. They can cause disease, they can produce toxins. An epidemic like the one in the show, it's science fiction, so it's kind of fun to watch and to see my organism of study appear in a show like this. So I feel more inclined to watch the show and to enjoy it from the perspective of science fiction and appreciating the elements of some realism that are there. But if I was dropped into a zombie apocalypse right now, that would be really scary on one side. And knowing that in that situation, access to medicine or labs are going to be very limited, I would just try my best to avoid getting infected. So use protective equipment, stay away from infected people, and just use my survival skills to try and escape while trying to figure out how we can possibly get rid of this fungus.
Sure.
Yes, so I have my mushroom socks.